There's something unshakable about a woman who finally realizes what she deserves. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not found in a book or gifted by someone else. It's discovered through pain, tested through trials, and sharpened by silence. A woman who knows her worth is a force, not because she's loud, not because she's arrogant, but because she no longer accepts crumbs from the table she used to serve. She stops apologizing for taking up space. She no longer shrinks herself to fit into boxes built by society, family, or relationships. She stops over-explaining her no and learns to walk away without looking back. Not because she's cold, but because she finally understands what it costs her to settle. You see, a woman's worth isn't in her looks, her relationship status, or how well she pleases others. Her worth is in her resilience, in how she keeps showing up, even when life knocks her down. It's in how she rises after betrayal, how she rebuilds after heartbreak, and how she grows despite being underestimated. When she knows her worth, she becomes calm, not because everything is perfect, but because she knows what chaos she will never allow again. Her peace becomes her priority. Her boundaries become non-negotiable. She no longer chases love, because she understands she is the love. She doesn't compete, compare, or beg. She builds, protects, and walks with grace. This kind of woman doesn't need validation from the outside world. She becomes her own compass. She trusts her intuition. She makes decisions not from fear, but from self-respect. And when people can't manipulate her anymore, they call her difficult. When she stops being available for disrespect, they call her distant. But she knows the power of walking alone rather than walking with people who make her feel invisible. When a woman knows her worth, she becomes magnetic, not because she's trying to be seen, but because she's finally seeing herself. She glows differently, she speaks differently, she moves differently. She becomes too focused to be distracted, too strong to be broken, too valuable to be ignored. And everything changes. Her energy changes, her standards rise, her circle shifts, and most importantly, her future transforms. Because now she chooses herself. And when a woman starts choosing herself every single time, the world around her begins to rise or get out of her way. She stops apologizing for existing. When a woman knows her worth, the first thing she stops doing is apologizing for who she is. No more shrinking into the background. No more softening her voice just to avoid sounding too much. She doesn't apologize for taking up space, physically, emotionally, intellectually. She knows she belongs in the room, and she walks in like she was born to be there. She used to say sorry for everything. Sorry for speaking too loudly, for dreaming too big, for having an opinion, for asking for what she deserved. But not anymore. Now, her voice doesn't shake when she speaks. Her words aren't filtered to make others comfortable. She speaks her truth, whether or not others are ready to hear it. Because once you understand your value, you stop seeking permission. You don't wait for someone to hand you confidence. You build it yourself. She no longer second-guesses her choices or looks around for approval. Her compass is internal now. She trusts her gut, her heart, her mind. She knows that what she thinks and feels matters, and she doesn't downplay that truth just to make herself easier to handle. She also stops feeling guilty for saying no. Her time, her energy, her peace, those are sacred now. She doesn't stretch herself thin just to please others or maintain a false sense of harmony. If something doesn't align with her spirit, she lets it go. She doesn't need to be liked by everyone. She just needs to be respected by the one person who matters most, herself. And let's be clear, this isn't arrogance, this is clarity. A healed woman who knows her worth isn't out here trying to prove anything. She's not trying to impress or compete. She's simply standing in her truth, and that truth is solid, grounded, untouchable. She may still be kind, but her kindness is no longer used against her. She may still be nurturing, but she's not draining herself to fix others. She may still be compassionate, but she has strong boundaries now. She realizes she doesn't have to earn her existence. She already deserves to be here, exactly as she is. That's the shift. That's the beginning. When a woman stops apologizing for existing, she takes back her power. And that power begins to ripple into every corner of her life. Relationships shift, opportunities shift, her self-image transforms, because finally, she's not living from a place of fear. She's living from a place of truth. And truth is where everything begins to change. She no longer begs, she chooses. There's a powerful transformation that occurs when a woman truly begins to understand her worth. She no longer pleads for affection, attention, or approval. The desperation that once drove her to chase love in broken places fades. It is replaced by discernment. She stops begging for tables she doesn't belong at. Instead, she builds her own. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow, deep awakening. After countless moments of feeling overlooked, underappreciated, or misused, she finally says, enough. She begins to see that the love she was begging for from others is the love she was supposed to give herself all along. And once she gives it, fully, unapologetically, she no longer tolerates the crumbs that once satisfied her hunger for connection. She starts choosing, not from fear of being alone, but from confidence that she's already whole. She becomes intentional. If someone's presence doesn't bring peace, they don't stay. If someone's energy drains her, she walks away. There's no dramatic exit, no grand confrontation, just a quiet, steady refusal to participate in anything that doesn't honor her. She no longer settles for situations that keep her playing small. Her time becomes precious, her space sacred. She learns to listen to her intuition, not the noise around her. People may call her cold, detached, or difficult, but what she's really doing is protecting her peace. Where she once begged for someone to choose her, she now chooses herself first. That doesn't mean she closes her heart. It means she no longer compromises her self-respect to keep it open for someone else. It means she leads with standards, not desperation. This kind of woman becomes magnetic. Her presence shifts rooms. Not because she tries to be loud or demanding, but because her self-respect radiates. She doesn't have to prove her worth. She simply knows it. And that knowing, that inner security, changes the way she walks, talks, and connects. She understands now, her worth isn't determined by how many people want her. It's determined by how deeply she values herself. So she stops proving and starts living. She stops shrinking and starts expanding. And as she stands taller, speaks clearer, and loves herself harder, everything around her begins to shift. Relationships become deeper, opportunities more aligned, and most of all, her peace becomes non-negotiable. Because once a woman knows her worth, begging becomes a thing of the past. Now she chooses, with clarity, with grace, and with full awareness that she is the prize. She no longer seeks validation. She moves with certainty. There comes a point in a woman's life when she no longer needs to ask the world for permission to exist fully. She stops shrinking herself to fit in, stops over-explaining to be understood, and stops waiting to be chosen. Because once she knows her worth, she no longer doubts her power. She no longer questions her right to take up space. She walks into rooms with quiet confidence, not arrogance, just a deep inner knowing that she belongs wherever she chooses to be. When a woman reaches this level of self-awareness, she becomes a force. She's not out to prove anything. She's not performing for praise or applause. She's simply honoring herself, her truth, her values, and her voice. She doesn't post for likes. She posts because she has something to say. She doesn't chase attention. She draws it naturally by being rooted in her identity. In the past, she might have waited for someone to tell her she was beautiful, smart, strong, capable, but not anymore. Now she affirms herself. Every morning she reminds herself of who she is. She looks in the mirror and sees a woman who has overcome storms, risen from pain, and still stands tall with grace. Her worth is no longer up for debate. It is not fragile. It is not dependent on whether people agree with her choices or approve of her journey. This change in energy is magnetic. People notice when a woman no longer needs them to see her because she sees herself. She becomes deeply grounded, less reactive, more intentional. Her boundaries sharpen, not out of bitterness, but out of love for herself. She doesn't tolerate disrespect, not because she's angry, but because she values peace over drama. She understands that anyone who doesn't respect her worth simply doesn't belong in her circle. The shift is profound. She moves with certainty, not because she has all the answers, but because she trusts herself to figure it out. She stops looking backward or seeking reassurance every step of the way. Instead, she moves forward with clarity. She knows what aligns with her purpose and what distracts from it, and she's willing to walk away from anything or anyone that dims her light. There's nothing more dangerous to the status quo than a woman who no longer needs to be rescued, chosen, or validated. Because she becomes unstoppable, her vision sharpens, her energy becomes contagious, and her presence, calm, fierce, and unapologetic, speaks volumes without her needing to say a word. She knows her worth, and that changes everything. When a woman knows her worth, everything changes. Part 4. From validation to vision, creating her own standard. A woman who truly knows her worth no longer begs the world to validate her existence. She doesn't wait for applause to confirm her brilliance or a nod of approval to move forward. She's learned that the need for external validation is a cage, and the moment she breaks free from it, her world opens wide. At first, it feels unfamiliar, this confidence in her own voice, because for too long she was trained to seek permission. From society, from partners, from friends, even from strangers. She was conditioned to ask, is this okay? Am I enough? Does this make me lovable? But now, she realizes the most important approval comes from within. When she looks in the mirror and says, I deserve more, she means it. And more importantly, she acts on it. Her vision is no longer shaped by the expectations others place on her shoulders. It's shaped by what sets her soul on fire. She knows what she wants, not because someone handed her a checklist, but because she created her own. Her goals aren't diluted to make others feel comfortable. She dreams in full color, in bold type, and in limitless scale. And that shift from validation to vision is when her world starts to transform. No longer bound by who likes her or who supports her, she becomes a creator of her reality. She walks into rooms not wondering if she belongs, but owning the space because she knows she does. She doesn't shrink to fit, she expands to lead. This kind of power doesn't come from arrogance. It comes from knowing how many times she was underestimated and still rose. From knowing how hard she's worked, how much she's healed, and how clearly she sees now. She's not in competition with anyone. Her only focus is becoming better than she was yesterday. When a woman stops living to be liked and starts living. Now, to be real, her relationships shift too. She no longer entertains one-sided friendships, manipulative love, or toxic environments. She sets boundaries not as walls, but as gates. Only those who respect her worth can come through. She speaks her truth, not to hurt, but to honor herself. She stands alone if she must, but never in silence. She doesn't fear being misunderstood because she understands herself. She doesn't need to be loud to be heard. Her presence is felt. Her peace is her power. And her value, that's no longer negotiable. The world often tells women to be sweet, agreeable, pleasing. But the woman who knows her worth rewrites the script. She's not afraid to say no. She's not afraid to walk away. She's not afraid to demand more. Not because she's difficult, but because she's deserving. Her standard is no longer about being good enough for others. It's about being true to herself. She doesn't chase love. She attracts it by being whole. She doesn't chase success. She builds it on her own terms. And she doesn't chase worth. It lives within her. Unshaken, because once a woman knows her worth, she stops apologizing for who she is. And when that happens, everything changes. Confidence is not loud, it's unshakable. When a woman finally understands her worth, she doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. Her confidence no longer roars to be heard, it simply exists. It's quiet, it's strong, it's unshakable. She doesn't walk into a room trying to be the loudest voice. She doesn't crave validation or attention, because once she's found her value, she realizes the power of being grounded, calm, and centered. Confidence isn't in what she wears, how she speaks, or how many people follow her. It's in the way she handles rejection without falling apart. It's in how she navigates silence without rushing to fill the space. It's in how she trusts her intuition even when the world is screaming the opposite. That's real strength. And it doesn't always look like what people expect. She no longer competes with others because she no longer feels the need to win battles that don't matter. She doesn't tear down other women, she uplifts them. Because she's not threatened, she's inspired. She knows there's enough room at the top for every woman who dares to believe in herself. A woman who knows her worth sees power in unity, not comparison. And because she's done the inner work, she knows what she brings to the table. She doesn't beg to be chosen. She doesn't chase love or opportunities. She attracts what aligns. She repels what drains. That kind of energy is magnetic. It changes how people respond to her, not because she's demanding attention, but because she's commanding respect without saying a word. She doesn't explain herself unnecessarily. She doesn't apologize for taking up space. She's no longer obsessed with being liked. She's committed to being respected, being true to herself, and being at peace. That is confidence, not arrogance, not pride, just a deep, steady knowing, I am enough as I am. And when life tries to shake her, because it will, she stands firm. Because this woman has weathered storms before. She's seen herself fall and rise again. And every time she rose, she became less dependent on approval and more dependent on truth. She knows she's not for everyone, and that's perfectly okay. Her worth is no longer on trial. It's no longer up for debate. She knows who she is. She knows what she deserves. And from that place, she lives unapologetically, gracefully, and fiercely. And her boundaries are her power. When a woman knows her worth, she no longer allows the world to walk over her. She doesn't let guilt trick her into overgiving. She doesn't shrink to fit in. She doesn't bend just to make someone else comfortable. Why? Because she has learned that her boundaries are not just fences. They are the gates to her peace. Too many women grow up being told to be nice, be quiet, don't make a scene, and always put others first. And while kindness is strength, self-sacrifice without limit is not. When a woman recognizes her value, she realizes that saying no isn't rude, it's sacred. It's how she preserves her energy for the things that truly matter, for the relationships that nourish her, for the dreams she's building, for the life she deserves. People may not always like it when a woman sets firm boundaries. They may say she's changed, that she's too strict, too cold. But the truth is, she's just no longer afraid of being misunderstood. Because when you're clear about your worth, you stop needing everyone's approval. You no longer beg for scraps of love or cling to people who make you question your value. You create space for those who honor your presence, not just tolerate it. Boundaries also help her hold herself accountable. A woman who knows her worth doesn't just protect her time from others. She protects it from her own distractions. She starts guarding her mornings, her habits, her focus. She stops waiting for permission to prioritize herself. She no longer explains why she's unavailable for things that drain her. She just is. And in doing so, she becomes powerful, not because she's hard or closed off, but because she's whole. Her energy isn't scattered. Her intentions aren't diluted. She's rooted in clarity, grounded in purpose, and moving with quiet confidence. There is a peace that comes when a woman stops over-explaining herself, when she trusts that her worth doesn't need to be proven through constant selflessness, when she understands that being kind doesn't mean being a doormat, that being available doesn't mean being accessible to everyone at all times. A woman with boundaries doesn't lose love. She filters for real love. She doesn't lose opportunities. She makes room for the right ones. She doesn't become cold. She becomes clear. And once she becomes clear, there's no going back. She walks through life no longer apologizing for taking up space, no longer trying to be smaller, quieter, or less opinionated. She speaks with intention. She walks with dignity. And she chooses relationships, friendships, and work that reflect the value she now knows she holds. Because when a woman finally believes she is worthy, everything around her must rise to meet her. And if it doesn't, it's no longer her burden to carry. Her presence speaks before her words. There's something powerful about a woman who walks into a room and doesn't need to say a word. Yet everyone feels her presence. It's not arrogance. It's not loudness. It's the calm, unshakable energy of someone who knows exactly who she is and what she brings to the table. That kind of presence comes from a place of self-worth, not performance. When a woman knows her worth, she no longer craves validation from the outside. She doesn't need to announce herself, prove herself, or chase after approval. Her worth is not tied to how many people like her, how many followers she has, or whether the world claps when she walks by. Her value is internal, rooted, secure, and unshaken. This presence, this quiet strength, changes how she handles everything. She walks away from drama, not because she's weak, but because peace is her priority. She doesn't argue to be understood by people who are committed to misunderstanding her. She doesn't waste energy on convincing anyone of her value. That energy is saved for building, creating, and rising. She no longer shows up where she's tolerated. She goes where she's celebrated. She doesn't force herself into rooms that don't honor her voice. If a door closes, she doesn't break it down. She builds a better one. When rejection comes, she doesn't crumble. She understands that rejection is sometimes divine redirection. Even in relationships, her energy shifts. She doesn't fall for empty words. She watches for consistent action. She values her time, her peace, and her heart. She's not afraid of being alone because she knows loneliness isn't cured by proximity. It's cured by alignment. If someone isn't aligned with her values, her peace, and her growth, she'll love them from a distance and keep moving. She leads with grace, but don't mistake her kindness for weakness. She's not the same woman who would shrink herself to make others comfortable. She doesn't apologize for her power, her dreams, or her standards. She understands that people will either rise to meet her energy or fall out of alignment with it. Either way, she's okay. Because at this stage of her journey, she's no longer performing. She's no longer pretending. She's no longer playing small. She's standing tall, rooted in self-respect, and flowing in her purpose. Her presence, quiet, powerful, undeniable, is her message. It tells the world, I've done the work. I've healed the wounds, I know my worth, and I refuse to settle for less than I deserve. And that changes everything. She creates her own legacy. When a woman finally knows her worth, she stops waiting for someone to hand her a script. She writes her own. And in part 8, we witness what happens when she no longer needs permission to exist boldly, loudly, unapologetically. She becomes the author of her story and the architect of her life. No longer molded by fear or controlled by expectation, she sets her own pace and path. She no longer fears being too much. She realizes that the world often tries to shrink powerful women because it doesn't know how to hold their fullness. But she refuses to shrink anymore. She expands, and in doing so, she gives other women permission to do the same. She learns that her legacy isn't about how many people clap for her or how many accolades she collects. Her legacy is about how many lives she touches, how many hearts she helps unlock, and how many women feel braver simply by watching her stand tall in her truth. She doesn't compete, she uplifts. Because a woman who knows her worth understands that empowering others doesn't diminish her own power. In fact, it multiplies it. The healed, awakened woman becomes a force of calm, clarity, and courage. She doesn't move to prove, she moves to build. And in her stillness, there is thunder. In her silence, there is wisdom. She knows when to speak, when to act, and when to simply walk away. Not out of weakness, but because she knows not everything deserves her time, energy, or attention. She redefines success. It's no longer about fitting into a world that never saw her. It's about creating a world that finally reflects her light. She stops seeking validation because she's already enough. She stops apologizing for dreaming big. She stops explaining her choices. She embraces her power, not with arrogance, but with grace. Her boundaries become sacred. Her self-care becomes non-negotiable. Her goals become clearer. Her relationships deepen. And her inner peace becomes her priority. She becomes the woman who can sit in solitude and still feel whole, because she's not looking for the world to fill her. She's already full, and the world begins to notice, not because she demanded it, but because she became undeniable. Her energy shifts rooms. Her presence speaks before she does. She's no longer trying to be liked. She's trying to live fully. This woman, the one who truly knows her worth, doesn't just exist. She transforms everything she touches. She doesn't settle. She doesn't silence herself. And most importantly, she doesn't forget who she is again. She leaves behind more than memories. She leaves behind meaning. Because now, she's not just living a life. She's building a legacy, one rooted in truth, strength, freedom, and love. There is a quiet revolution that begins when a woman finally recognizes her worth. It doesn't need to be shouted from rooftops or validated by anyone outside of her own reflection. It's not about ego or arrogance, it's about truth. When a woman knows her value, she stops apologizing for taking up space. She stops seeking permission to live fully, and she begins walking through the world with a clarity that nothing can blur. She no longer begs for love. She no longer chases validation. She no longer waits to be chosen, because she understands she is the prize. Her time is sacred. Her energy is gold. Her boundaries are not optional. The woman who knows her worth doesn't settle, not because she's difficult, but because she knows what peace feels like now. She knows the difference between attention and respect, between flattery and genuine care, and she chooses wisely. You see, everything changes, not just inside her, but around her. The way people treat her shifts because she teaches them how. The opportunities she once thought were out of reach begin to align. The dreams she buried under doubt rise back up. When she walks into a room, she doesn't shrink, she expands. Not to overshadow others, but to stand in her fullness. And in doing so, she gives other women permission to rise too. That's the power of knowing your worth. It's not just a personal awakening, it's a ripple effect. It transforms relationships, careers, health, vision, and legacy. She learns to say no without guilt. She embraces solitude without fear. She dares to build a life on her terms, not one dictated by expectations, but one fueled by inner truth. And for those watching from the outside, it might seem like she's changed. But really, she's just come home to herself. She's stripped away the masks. She's walked through her pain, healed the wounds, and stepped into her power. She doesn't need to be liked by everyone. She's not performing anymore. She's real, raw, and rooted in self-respect. So if you're a woman still questioning your worth, know this. You don't need to earn it. You were born with it. Life may have dimmed your light, but it never took away your brilliance. It's time to reclaim it, to stop doubting your strength, to stop shrinking your voice, to stop settling for less than the extraordinary life you deserve. Because when you truly know your worth, you stop living in reaction and start living in creation. You don't chase, you attract. You don't tolerate, you choose. You don't break down, you rise up. And every step forward becomes a declaration. I am enough, I always was, and now I refuse to forget it. Let the world adjust to your glow. Let the old version of you rest. She served her purpose. But now, it's time for the woman who knows who she is and knows she's unstoppable. Everything changes when you know your worth, and the change starts now.